Hey guys, this is the newest installment of Bible in 5-ish, and today we're moving on and we're continuing our theme of videos looking at women in Christianity. And today we want to specifically address in just a few short minutes, which obviously the study requires a lot longer than that, 1 Corinthians 14, 34 and 35. This is one of the major verses. There's only two, but this is one of the two verses that people use in speaking of women and trying to figure out how to address women in Christianity. I would start by saying to all of us to remember that we were talking about Corinth, which got almost nothing right ever. Paul was writing them letters about dealing with idols and addressing whether Jesus' resurrection even occurred, rampant sexual immorality, prostitution, sex used in worship. So this isn't exactly the baseline model church that we want to try to achieve. All that said, if you just look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7 talks about equality in marriage. It addresses equality in sex, which was a big deal, and saying that women were equal in sex, men were equal in sex. They were both equal in that. Mutual submission within their sexuality and marriage, neither having authority over their own body, but having authority over the other's body in marriage. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, you've got verse 5 that addresses how it's instructions for how women should be praying and prophesying. So it's while you're praying and while you're prophesying in the assembly. And some people will say, well, they could have been praying silently. Unlikely. There was not a real great model for that. Most of this culturally at that time, prayers were recited, even if you were completely by yourself, out loud. Not to say it's impossible. Prophesying silently is certainly impossible, though. So we have that occurring. So women can't be receiving instructions on how to pray and prophesy within the assembly if they're not praying and prophesying in the assembly. Still in chapter 11, verses 8 through 12, there's a whole section there about how men and women are equal. It's like, yep, woman came from man, and he's like, and then after that, every single man has come from woman, and they all come from God, so there's no difference. Don't get it twisted. They're all the same in those section of verses. Verse 14, it says you, and if you watched last video, you'll recognize that this is y'all. It says y'all, brothers and sisters, you all may prophesy. For the church, he goes on to say, I want you all to prophesy, brothers and sisters. So we see that this is occurring. Still in chapter 14, verse 23, it says, therefore, if all the church comes together and all speak in tongues, and goes on to say, it's talking about confusion and things, and then it goes on to say, but if all prophesy when all of the church has come together, so we know this includes men and women. Verse 26 says, brothers and sisters, when you all come together, each of you will have these gifts. And it lists out all of these different gifts. Verse 26 through 40 is a whole section that you should read that's talking about different groups that should be silent. So yes, 14, 34, and 35 says women should be silent. 26 through 40 is a whole section about that. We start with people speaking in tongues, and it says, if there's no one to interpret, they should be silent. Now, he just talked about that everyone should be trying to speak in tongues, and everyone should be doing these things. So it's not an injunction that they should always be silent or forever be silent. It was about order, and he said, listen, if this is chaos, then in this moment you should be silent. Then it goes on to talk about prophets, and it says if somebody's prophesying, two of them are, and a third one wants to prophesy, then the first one that started should be silent so that the others can go on. So we have speaking in tongues should be silent, even though he just told us all to do it. Prophesying should be silent, even though he said we should all want to prophesy. Women should be silent, but there we just cut it off. Verse 33, it says, for God is not a God of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. Now put that there because that could be there. We move as in all the churches of the saints as the opening to verse 34, works as a great conclusion for the end of verse 33. We didn't have paragraphs, we didn't have commas and periods, and so we choose where to place this, and it's been placed in different places in different versions. And so I didn't make that up, but there's an ending there. For God is not a God of confusion, but a God of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. Then we come to verse 34 and 35. Now, here's where it's going to get interesting, and I'm going to stop the video. The next video is going to be just entirely on about a half a dozen different interpretations of what 34 and 35 could mean, starting with, it means exactly what it says, straight out, flat line, with nothing else thought about, and then worked through about 5 more possible interpretations, and then we'll look at each of those next time. Thanks, guys.